The boarding gate was seconds away from closing. Final announcements echoed through the near-empty terminal. VIP passengers had already vanished down the jet bridge. A single father, clutching a faded backpack, reached the desk. He held his 7-year-old daughter's hand firmly. The gate agent shook her head coldly. "You can't board. The manifest is locked," the father asked in a low, calm voice. "Why?" A nearby businessman sneered, "Rules are rules, pal." The little girl gripped her father's arm, eyes wide. The agent raised a hand, blocking their path. Outside, the massive aircraft began its slow pushback. Suddenly, a high-pitched alert chirped inside the cockpit. Within seconds, the entire terminal froze in absolute silence. Evan Brooks was 39 years old, but his eyes carried the weight of a century. He was an independent aviation systems engineer, the kind of specialist who spoke in code and thought in structural diagrams. To the outside world, he looked like a man who had given up on elegance. His clothes were functional, often stained with a faint scent of hydraulic fluid or ozone, and his face was perpetually etched with the shadow of a man who didn't sleep enough. He lived a quiet life, a deliberate choice after the world had taken so much from him. His wife, Sarah, had passed away 3 years ago due to unforeseen post-surgical complications, a failure in a system that was supposed to be foolproof. Since then, his entire universe had shrunk to the size of his daughter, Lily. Lily was 7, a bright-eyed girl who had inherited her mother's radiant smile and her father's quiet power of observation. She didn't complain about the small house or the fact that her father spent hours staring at blueprints. She understood that her father was a protector, even if he didn't wear a uniform. Evan avoided the media, avoided the corporate boardrooms, and spent his days in a workshop filled with high-precision instruments, flickering monitors, and the constant rhythmic hum of testing rigs. He was a ghost in the industry, a man whose signatures were on the most critical safety modules in the world, yet whose name was known only to a few top-tier executives. This specific flight was the most important journey of their lives. It wasn't a vacation or a business trip. Lily needed a specialized corrective surgery for a rare heart condition, a procedure only performed by a handful of surgeons in a city halfway across the country. They had been waiting for this surgical slot for 18 months, navigating a labyrinth of insurance approvals and medical consultations. Evan had planned every micro detail of the trip, but as the old saying goes, man plans and the universe laughs. The morning had started with a series of cascading failures. A freak multi-car pileup on the interstate had paralyzed traffic for miles. Then, the airport shuttle bus experienced a total engine stall just 2 miles from the terminal. Evan had grabbed Lily and their bags, running along the shoulder of the road until a passing motorist offered them a lift to the departures curb. They had reached the airport with their hearts hammering against their ribs, weaving through the dense crowds of the morning rush. By the time they reached the gate, they were gasping for air, Lily's small suitcase rattling loudly against the polished tiles. Their tickets were valid, but the gate agent's screen showed them as inactive. When they reached the counter, Evan didn't yell. He didn't demand special treatment because of his credentials. He stood before the agent, sweat beads rolling down his forehead, and explained the life-and-death nature of their travel. "My daughter has surgery at 8 a.m. tomorrow. If we miss this connection, there isn't another flight that gets us there in time. Please, look at her." He wasn't begging for mercy. He was presenting a critical failure in their schedule. But the agent was exhausted, a cog in a massive corporate machine. She had spent the morning dealing with angry businessmen and crying toddlers. She saw Evan as just another passenger who couldn't manage his time. She didn't even look at Lily. She simply pointed to the digital clock. "The gate closes exactly 15 minutes prior to departure. The bridge is already being retracted. No exceptions. It's for safety and on-time performance. Evan understood the rules. He had helped write many of them. He respected protocols because they were the only thing standing between order and chaos in the sky. But as he stood there, his engineering instincts took over. Through the thick, soundproofed glass of the terminal, he watched the Boeing 737-800. His ears, tuned by decades of diagnostic listening, picked up a sound that shouldn't have been there. It was a faint, metallic clack echoing through the hollow structure of the air bridge, followed by a subtle, rhythmic shudder as the engines began their initial spool-up. To anyone else, it was just the ambient noise of a busy airport. To Evan, it was a screaming warning. He felt a literal chill go down his spine. It was a non-uniform beat in the startup sequence, a microscopic hesitation in the rotation of the left side turbine. He had heard that exact frequency once before, 10 years ago, during a high-stress test for a prototype engine in a desert facility. That time, the clack had been the final sound of an auxiliary coupling failing under intense thermal expansion. The resulting fire had nearly leveled the testing hangar and cost 2 lives. Evan took a deep breath, the air in the terminal suddenly feeling thin. He looked at the plane, then at his daughter's hopeful face, then back at the agent. He knew the risk. If he stayed silent, the plane would take off, and there was a high probability of a mid-air emergency. If he spoke up, he would be labeled a madman, a security threat, or a disruptive passenger. He weighed the lives of the 200 people on that plane against his own desire to remain invisible. The engineer in him won. The gate agent gestured with a sharp, dismissive wave for Evan to move behind the yellow safety line. "Sir, you are obstructing the area. You need to step back. There is nothing more I can do for you. Please head to the customer service desk to rebook for tomorrow morning." Evan didn't move an inch. His boots felt like they were bolted to the floor. His eyes were fixed on the aircraft's left wing, watching the slight oscillation of the engine cowling. "I need 30 seconds with the cockpit," Evan said, his voice dropping an octave into a tone of absolute, chilling command. "Tell the captain to check the vibration sensors on the left side auxiliary coupling. Tell him to look at the secondary harmonics, now." The agent laughed, a dry, cynical sound that grated on Evan's nerves. "Sir, I am not calling a flight deck because a passenger thinks he hears a noise. Do you have any idea how many people claim to hear things? That is not how aviation works. It's against every security and communication procedure we have." A VIP passenger, standing nearby with a gold-trimmed leather carry-on, groaned loudly and checked his expensive watch. "Are you kidding me with this? Security! Get this guy out of here so we can have some peace. Some of us have actual multi-million-dollar deals to close. We don't have time for this amateur dramatics." Lily started to cry, her small fingers digging into the fabric of Evan's worn, oil-stained jacket. She didn't understand the engineering mechanics, but she understood the mounting tension, the hostile looks, and the fear in her father's eyes. Evan knelt down for a second, his world narrowing to just his daughter. He stroked her hair, trying to project a calm he didn't feel. "It's okay, Peanut. Just stay right here next to the backpack. I'm going to make sure everyone is safe." He stood back up and looked at the flight display monitor flickering above the desk. He noticed the tail number of the aircraft. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He knew that specific airframe. It was part of a batch that had recently undergone a mandatory software update for its engine control units, ECU. It was a Type 4 patch designed to optimize fuel efficiency during high-altitude cruise. But Evan had read the classified white papers on that patch during an independent consulting gig. There was a documented, extremely rare bug, a logic error that occurred only when the ambient temperature hit a specific threshold during a cold start at sea level. Today, the temperature on the tarmac was exactly at that threshold. The clack came again, louder this time, a resonant snap that vibrated through the terminal floor. Evan knew exactly what was happening. The coupling was shearing. Within minutes of reaching full takeoff thrust, the metal would fail completely, sending high-velocity shrapnel through the high-pressure fuel lines. It would be an uncontained engine failure, the worst-case scenario for any pilot. He saw a red phone on the wall behind the counter, the emergency internal line that connected directly to the ramp tower. He made a sudden, decisive move for it. Instantly, 2 airport security officers, who had been hovering nearby, stepped forward with their hands moving toward their belts. "Sir, step back from the equipment. Final warning, you are interfering with airport operations." The gate agent was already reaching for her radio, her voice frantic as she called for Code Yellow assistance. The businessman sneered, "Finally, get this lunatic out of here." Evan stood perfectly still, his hands raised in a non-threatening gesture, but his eyes were blazing. This was the freeze-frame moment. He could hear the heavy, industrial thrum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit, APU. He knew that the pilots, sitting in their soundproofed, pressurized cockpit, were seeing nothing but green lights on their primary flight displays. The standard sensors weren't calibrated to catch this specific mechanical anomaly until the vibration reached a level of structural failure. He looked at the security guards, then at the agent. He realized that if he didn't do something radical, something that would probably get him arrested, 200 people were about to fly into a metal-shredding catastrophe. He had to bridge the gap between his knowledge and their ignorance, and he had to do it in the next 10 seconds. Evan didn't shout like a madman. He didn't struggle against the guards who were now closing in. Instead, he projected his voice with the surgical clarity of a lead instructor at a flight academy. "Abort the start. The left side auxiliary coupling is about to shear. Check the secondary vibration harmonics on the N2 shaft. You have less than 60 seconds before the thermal lock triggers a catastrophic uncontained failure." The entire gate area went dead silent. The specific technical terminology, N2 shaft, secondary harmonics, thermal lock, acted like a physical barrier. People who had been looking at their phones or complaining about delays suddenly looked up. The security guards paused, their training telling them that this wasn't the rambling of a crazy person. It was the report of a specialist. They had heard disturbed people before, but they had never heard anyone shout engineering specs with such terrifying precision. One guard loosened his grip on Evan's arm, mesmerized by the absolute certainty in the man's eyes. The gate agent began to snap a retort, her mouth opening to say, "Stay back," but she was interrupted by reality. A red light on her console, linked to the ramp's emergency status, began to pulse with a slow, ominous beat. Simultaneously, through the window, the ground crew outside began waving their signal batons frantically in the emergency stop pattern. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot had heard a strange, low-frequency resonance through the airframe that wasn't matching the engine RPM. He had instinctively glanced at the secondary diagnostic sub-menu, the one usually hidden behind 3 layers of software that pilots rarely check during routine pushback. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of near death. The businessman who had sneered earlier now stood with his jaw hanging open, looking between Evan and the silent aircraft. Every passenger in the gate area seemed to hold their breath as if exhaling might cause the wing to explode. The vibration sensors on the left engine were spiking into the deep red, far beyond the safety margins. The pilot immediately grabbed the radio, his voice cracking with urgency. "Ground, this is Flight 104. We are declaring a ground emergency, terminating pushback immediately. We have an uncontained vibration in Engine 1. Shutting down all systems now. Send fire crews to the left wing." The massive engines began to whine down, the roar fading into a haunting, echoing silence that felt louder than the noise. The plane stopped dead in its tracks. The terminal air felt heavy, charged with the realization of what had almost happened. Lily stopped crying and looked up at her father. She saw the way he stood, shoulders back, jaw set, a man who had just stood his ground against a global corporation, and won. Evan didn't look at the passengers, or the agent. He kept his eyes on the plane until he saw the yellow fire trucks rushing toward the left wing with their lights flashing. A faint, acrid smell of scorched metal and hydraulic fluid began to waft through the airport's ventilation system. The disaster had been averted by a margin of less than a minute. Within 5 minutes, the atmosphere at the gate changed from hostility to pure, unadulterated shock. The lead technician for the airport's maintenance division, a man named Henderson with 30 years of grease under his fingernails, arrived at the gate. He was pale and breathing hard. He opened his ruggedized tablet and pulled up the flight manifest, the security logs, and the passenger IDs. He looked at Evan, then back at his screen, then back at Evan again. "Which one of you is Evan Brooks?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly with a mixture of disbelief and respect. Evan stepped forward, still holding Lily's hand. Henderson's eyes went wide. He didn't see a disruptive passenger or a biker-looking guy. He saw a legend. He turned to the gate agent and the stunned security guards, who were now awkwardly stepping back. "Do you have any actual idea who this is? Do you know whose name is on the patents for the very logic gates that just saved that plane?" The security guards exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had almost tackled a man who was effectively the guardian of the skies. Henderson turned the tablet around to show a high-security clearance profile. This wasn't just some disgruntled traveler. This was the man the FAA called when the impossible happened. The gate agent's hands began to shake as she realized her policy had almost led to a massacre. Henderson turned the tablet around. Evan Brooks wasn't just a single dad. He was the original architect of the safety redundancy module for the Apex engine series, the very engines on that aircraft. He was the man who had written the emergency shutdown protocols that every airline in the world used. Years ago, he had submitted a formal report warning about the rare cold start vulnerability in the new ECU software patch, but the corporate board had dismissed it as a statistically insignificant edge case. They had ignored him because a fix would have meant grounding thousands of planes and losing millions in quarterly revenue. The captain of the flight, a veteran pilot with silver hair named Miller, walked up the jet bridge and entered the gate area. He was drenched in sweat, his uniform cap tucked under his arm. He walked straight to Evan, ignoring the managers and the security. He looked Evan in the eye. Two men who understood the language of the sky. He didn't ask for credentials. He had felt the plane stabilize the moment the engines were cut based on the crazy warning from the gate. "You're the one who called it," Miller said. "It wasn't a question. You saved my crew. You saved my passengers. And you saved me. I felt that coupling snap in my teeth. Thank you." The power in the room shifted with the finality of a closing vault. The gate agent stood frozen, her face a mask of pale regret. The VIP passenger who had mocked Evan earlier suddenly found his reflection in the window very interesting, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Evan didn't want the praise, the handshakes, or the cameras. He just looked at the terminal clock. He had saved the plane, but he was still failing his daughter. "I just need to get her to the hospital," he said quietly. The airline's station manager arrived on the scene within minutes, panting and followed by a flurry of assistants in suits. They were already in full damage control mode, their minds racing with the legal implications of what had just occurred. "Mr. Brooks, we are incredibly, profoundly sorry. This was a massive failure of communication on our part. We want to make this right. We are ready to offer you and your daughter a private executive charter to your destination immediately. We will cover every cent of your medical expenses for the surgery. We want to include your name in our official safety commendation for the board." They were offering him everything: fame, money, a private jet, trying to buy his silence before the local news crews, who were already circling the airport, could get a hold of the story. Evan looked at the manager, his expression flat and unreadable. He saw through the corporate desperation. "I don't want your money," he said, his voice echoing in the silent gate. "And I don't want a private jet. I want 3 specific things, and I want them documented right now." The manager nodded frantically, his assistant poised with a tablet to record the demands. "Anything, sir? Name it." Evan pointed through the glass at the grounded plane. "First, you ground every single aircraft in your fleet using that specific Type 4 ECU patch until a manual, physical inspection of the auxiliary couplings is completed. Not a digital check, a physical one. Tonight. Second, you conduct an independent third-party audit of your internal safety reporting pipeline. When an engineer, internal or external, flags a risk, you listen. You don't calculate the probability of a lawsuit, you calculate the cost of a life." The manager swallowed hard. That demand alone would cost the company tens of millions of dollars in canceled flights and logistics. He hesitated for a heartbeat. But Captain Miller stepped forward, crossing his arms over his chest, his eyes fixed on his superior. "He's right. And if the company doesn't do it, I'll make sure the pilots' union and the FAA hear exactly why we almost had a total hull loss on the tarmac today because a gate agent wouldn't pick up a phone." The manager crumbled. "Consider it done. We will issue the grounding order within the hour." Evan then looked at the gate agent, who was trembling, her eyes red from held-back tears. She was clearly expecting to be fired on the spot. "And third," Evan said, his voice softening just a fraction, "give this woman a seat at the next senior safety leadership seminar. She was following your rules, but your rules taught her to forget the human element in front of her. Teach your staff that a passenger's concern is a data point, not a nuisance. Empathy is a safety protocol, too." The gate agent looked up, stunned. She had expected a vengeful strike. Instead, Evan had given her a path to redemption. He didn't believe in the blame culture that plagued modern corporations. He believed in repairing broken systems. And the system had failed because it had become too rigid to hear the truth. Lily pulled on his sleeve, her voice a small whisper in the large hall. "Daddy, are we still going to see the doctor? Is everyone okay?" Evan knelt down and picked her up, her small weight a reminder of why he had fought so hard. "Yes, Peanut, everyone is safe, and we're going to get you all fixed up." The airline arranged for a special, high-priority flight on a smaller jet immediately. As Evan and Lily walked toward the new gate, the passengers who had been evacuated from Flight 104 began to stand up. It started with one person, then another. They began to clap, a deep, rhythmic applause that filled the terminal. It wasn't a loud, cheering crowd. It was a somber, genuine expression of gratitude from people who realized they had just been given their lives back. The businessman with the gold-trimmed bag stood in the back, silent and humbled, watching the man he had called a lunatic walk away with his daughter. Evan and Lily arrived at the hospital with 2 hours to spare before the pre-op sequence began. The surgery was a grueling 6-hour ordeal, but it was a total success. The surgeons spoke of miraculous timing. As Lily recovered in the quiet, sun-filled pediatric ward, the aviation world outside was in a state of total upheaval. The Brooks audit, as the media quickly dubbed it, forced a massive global recall of the software patch. Other major airlines, realizing the liability, followed suit within 48 hours. Because one man had been late to a flight and had the courage to speak up, the entire industry had been forced to look in the mirror. The efficiency over safety mindset had been dealt a massive blow. Evan stayed in the hospital room, sleeping in an uncomfortable plastic chair next to Lily's bed. He ignored the hundreds of interview requests from CNN, the BBC, and major talk shows that were flooding his encrypted email. He had no interest in being a hero or a viral sensation. He just wanted to be the father his daughter deserved. A few weeks later, after they had returned home and Lily was back to running around the backyard, Evan received a small, nondescript package. Inside was a handwritten note from Captain Miller, written on official airline stationery. Along with the note was a pair of silver pilot wings, the old-fashioned kind, heavy and made of real metal. The note was brief but powerful. We listened. The new manuals arrived at training today. Page 1 now has a new gold standard rule. Any credible safety call must be escalated immediately, regardless of the source. You didn't just save a plane that day, Evan. You saved the soul of this profession from the bean counters. Fly safe, my friend. Evan looked at the wings for a long time, the sunlight reflecting off the silver. He felt a sense of closure he hadn't felt since Sarah passed away. He placed the wings in a small wooden box in his workshop, next to his wife's old watch and Lily's first drawing of a plane. He didn't need a trophy on his wall to remind him of what he had done. The silence of the workshop, once a place of isolation, now felt like a place of peace. He went back to his workbench. He sat Lily down next to him and showed her how to solder a simple circuit, explaining how electricity needs a clear path to follow, and how one small break can stop the whole machine. "Remember what I told you at the airport?" he asked, his voice warm. Lily nodded, her eyes bright and healthy. "If something feels wrong, you have to speak up, even if the grown-ups are loud." Evan smiled, a genuine, deep expression of pride. "That's right, Peanut, because the truth is always louder than the noise, if you have the courage to say it at the right time." The airport gates remain as busy and chaotic as ever. Thousands of people rush through them every single day, caught up in the stress of their own lives, their own deadlines, and their own minor tragedies. But at one specific airline, the culture is fundamentally different now. The staff looks at the stragglers, the single parents, and the quiet men in leather jackets with a new kind of respect. They know that behind a faded backpack or a tired face, there might be the very person who keeps the sky from falling. The decision to stop a man at a gate was a mistake, but the decision to finally listen to him changed everything. And it all happened in just a few breathless, life-altering seconds. If this story reminded you that true expertise often wears a humble face, then you are a part of our community. At Daddy Healing Stories, we celebrate the quiet warriors, the devoted fathers, and the unsung heroes who keep our world steady. Don't forget to follow our journey as we tell the stories of those who lead by example. We'll see you in the next story.